No one is above the law. The victims of Ghislaine Maxwell speak of their relief after she was found guilty of sex trafficking young girls in an American court. We'll assess the verdict's ramifications on this side of the Atlantic. Also tonight, Nightingale wards, extra beds as hospital admissions rise. And the baby Sumatran tiger who arrived just in time for Christmas at London Zoo.
This is the ITV Evening News with Geraint, Vincent.
Good evening. Victims of Ghislaine Maxwell have spoken of their relief after a jury found the British socialite guilty of sex trafficking charges in a New York court. Maxwell could spend the rest of her life in prison for grooming young girls to be sexually abused by Jeffrey Epstein. Her lawyers have said they will appeal the decision. Our US correspondent Emma Murphy reports.
She was described as a sophisticated predator, a woman who preyed on the young and vulnerable to satisfy her friend and former lover's lust for underage girls. Ghislaine Maxwell lured them to their homes. One of those they targeted told of being invited to their isolated New Mexico ranch by Maxwell, only to be subject to a naked massage by her, and then forced to run from her bed when Epstein got into it.
I think justice is a complicated term, but I was speaking with another Epstein survivor last night, and I think she said it well. When, she said this is one important step towards justice, and I think in this particular case we know there were other people involved and other perpetrators, and we certainly hope that there will continue to be investigations so that other people will be held accountable for the ways that they abused people.
A jury unanimously found Maxwell guilty of 5 of the 6 charges she faced, including trafficking of girls for sex. The 60-year-old barely flinched as the verdicts were returned. She poured herself a glass of water as her lawyer patted her back. Then she was returned to custody. Those who represent other victims of Epstein have welcomed the outcome of a decade-long quest for justice.
My clients and I were moved to tears that this day has finally come. This woman who has caused so much suffering to so many girls and women is finally convicted of crime. She is a convicted sex trafficker. She's had 60 years of freedom, and may she never walk free another day of her life.
Ghislaine Maxwell's legal team spent 5 weeks discrediting the testimonies of women who described in awful detail how their lives were changed by her actions. That legal team maintains her innocence.
We firmly believe in Ghislaine's innocence. Obviously, we are very disappointed with the verdict. We have already started working on the appeal, and we are confident that she will be vindicated.
The rest of Ghislaine Maxwell's life rests on that appeal. Having taken so many childhoods, she is likely to spend the rest of her life as a prisoner. Emma Murphy, ITV News.
Well, Ghislaine Maxwell was a close friend of Prince Andrew and introduced him to Jeffrey Epstein. I'm joined by our royal editor, Chris Shipp. The Prince wasn't involved in this trial, of course, Chris, but there may be implications for him.
Yeah, Geraint, publicly nothing from Prince Andrew's office today, nothing on the record. And that's, I think, in large part because nothing really positive flows from this verdict for Prince Andrew. Now, privately, sources in his office point to a couple of facts, and they are these, that it was Ghislaine Maxwell on trial here, not Prince Andrew. And they also say that Prince Andrew's main accuser, Virginia Giuffre, she in that infamous photo with Prince Andrew's arm allegedly around her waist, they say she wasn't called as a witness in Ghislaine Maxwell's trial, which his lawyers suggests means she could have been considered an unreliable witness. But beyond that, it's hard to see how, anything positive comes from this at all. Of course, Virginia Giuffre claims it was Ghislaine Maxwell who trafficked her to Prince Andrew. Prince Andrew himself has said that he knew Ghislaine Maxwell since she was at university here. He, of course, denies all the allegations made against him. But as we stand tonight, he's now the former friend of not just one convicted sex offender, but 2 convicted sex offenders.
OK, Chris Shipp, many thanks. New figures show the number of people in hospital with COVID-19 in England rose above 11,000 for the first time since February, up 61% from a week ago. It comes as 90% of people in the UK have now been reported to have had a first dose of the vaccine to fight it. Nightingale wards are now being set up in preparation for a potential surge in Omicron hospital admissions. Our political correspondent Carl Dinnan has more.
The NHS is on a war footing. In England, nearly 11,500 people are now in hospital with COVID, the most since February. And although COVID treatments are improving, staff morale is not.
I just can't describe to you, the kind of sinking feeling that you don't have the resources to do the best for your patients.
Yet the NHS is still having to prepare for the possible consequences of the surge in Omicron cases. From next week, construction of Nightingale hubs will start at 8 hospitals, including the Lister in Stevenage, to provide extra capacity for patients who aren't yet well enough to go home. But as with the original Nightingale hospitals, the issue may not be having enough beds, but having enough staff.
We do not doubt that the public require those services and the care and treatment that those services will provide. Our concern is, how do we get an already exhausted workforce to spread themselves even more across those additional 4,000 beds?
Medics say most people in intensive care with COVID have not been fully vaccinated. So there was particular outrage when anti-vax campaigners entered a testing centre in Milton Keynes yesterday and carried off equipment.
The anti-vax kind of sabotages, are despicable, and I think people will be watching it in kind of disbelief in many ways. The vaccine programme is incredibly safe.
And 90% of people over the age of 12 have now had at least one jab. Carl Dinnan, ITV News.
A man killed in an explosion outside Liverpool Women's Hospital last month had used his flat as a bomb-making factory, an inquest has heard. Imad al-Swaylimin was killed when his homemade device went off in the back of a taxi on Remembrance Sunday. The inquest heard he had been buying materials used to make explosives, including 2,000 ball bearings. The coroner ruled the bomb was made with murderous intent and said it was fortunate that there was only one victim. He said it was unclear whether he intended the device to detonate when it did. And finally, a quick look at a very special new arrival. This is 10-year-old Sumatran tiger Geisha and her new cub together just hours after she gave birth at London Zoo. Sumatran tigers are critically endangered, with only around 300 left in the wild. Vet's cub doesn't have a name yet, and the zoo is asking its members for suggestions. That's all for now. I'll be here with the news at 10 o'clock. Until then, have a good evening. Bye-bye.